Ken, if I had your mobile number, I would probably make that as your profile picture on my phone.
There you go. I'll shoot it to you in chat. It's all good. Just so you can see what Tyler's laughing at, Natalie. My wife, well, and I was talking about this in the chat for the meeting as well. Like, my wife got called in for a night shift last night. So rather than her being the one to pick up my daughters from high school, it falls on me to do this, which is totally fine. But the recording studio is currently with me in the van, as opposed to in my workspace at home. So ridiculousness.
I was going to say, I was so impressed. You have like a whole setup in your car. I'm like, you must travel a ton.
Well, you know what? I've been doing I'm going to turn this off to save bandwidth. I've been doing the podcasting game enough that, for long enough that like my kit, actually, I'll show you one more thing. My kit has gotten like ever more portable as I've gone along. So like I used to have like, a mixer, and I needed to have it like plugged into wall power. And then I got like a USB mixer. And now I just have this little unit here, which is like perfect. It's got a little soundboard. I can plug in 4 mics. There's actually a Bluetooth adapter for it, but I haven't gotten that from Best Buy yet because of the Canada Post strike. So whatever.
Heard about that.
Anyway, so yeah, this is the setup now, and I'm coming to you live from the high school parking lot. Welcome back to OT After Hours, a podcast about industrial cybersecurity, why it matters, and all of the challenges that it presents. We will not discuss my own challenges in recording this episode any further than we did in the intro. But before we do dive into the topic that is actually the topic today, we'll go around and introduce ourselves. There's only 4 of us on right now. There's a whole bunch of other people on the invite list. We'll see who actually makes it. I know we're kind of all busy finishing up before the holiday break. Some people are coming off of their Thanksgiving breaks, but whatever. Just going across. You know what? We will actually start with our new guest, and that would be Natalie. Hello, Natalie. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi, everyone. My name is Natalie. I'm a cyber technology consultant now with Rockwell Automation and Verve. I used to be a network engineer, so I spent a ton of time in the field in different types of operational sites, from food and beverage to natural gas and some refineries. So spent a little bit of time at a lot of customer sites. And I guess a fun fact about me is I like to run a lot. So that's a little bit about me.
Nice. Very nice. And of course, Tyler, you're back too. So how you doing, man?
Hey, it's going well. I only run when chased.
And how about you, Zach? Zach is also back with us today.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. This is Zach Woltjer from Verve's customer success team. Happy to join you guys again.
Brilliant. I tend not to get chased that much, so I don't run typically when I'm being chased. I suppose I would, but I'm looking at your profile picture, Natalie, and you seem to be in some kind of industrial facility. And I know for a fact that if I'm running in an industrial facility, it's to get ahead of boom.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd run in that facility in particular. I think it was like 110 degrees in Texas that day. And I think I was standing right underneath a kiln. So it was a little hotter than whatever the weather app was telling me.
Oh, yeah, that's a little brutal. And I didn't introduce myself in the last episode, and that was foolish of me, but I continue to be Kenneth Kully, Verve Systems Support Lead. And apparently I'm in charge of this thing still. They haven't taken it away from me yet, so I guess we're good to go. I made the joke about getting ahead of boom, and that was actually my lame attempt at both a joke and also at a segue into the actual topic, because it's the end of another busy year, and for the final episode of 2024, Sally, one of our marketing people, pitched the idea of looking ahead to 2025 and try to make some predictions about where we see trends in OT cybersecurity going in the new year, because, stuff is only getting weirder out there, and it is anybody's guess. Today it's our guess as to where things are going to go in our industry and for our clients as things roll along. And like I said, I wanted to just kind of put a starter thought out there. This is something that's been like gnawing at my mind for the last month or so. I think because it's something I know I've mentioned a couple times in different episodes of the podcast. It's something that hit the news again here in Canada late last month. And it's even something that I had some engagements on LinkedIn with people about. And that is the water industry. And I don't know exactly why I have this sense, but something tells me that something is going to happen with the water industry in the next year or so. It's going to be like a really, really like shockingly serious cyber event, which hopefully, but maybe also unfortunately, will be enough to get the DHS and its analogs in Canada to start thinking about water as critical infrastructure, because currently it doesn't really fall under those, it doesn't really fall under that header, at least from a regulatory standpoint. I don't know why. Something about it just makes me think that the water industry is going to get lit up in not the best way coming up in the next year or two, because it tends to be the case that water operators don't have a lot of budget to play with. And so their cybersecurity programs tend to be, greenfield at best, and in some cases, brownfield, almost non-existent.
It always baffles me that the water industry isn't considered critical infrastructure, especially considering, you kind of need water to survive. So it's always very interesting to me that's the case, and that compliance and regulations hasn't caught up with that. And we see it all the time in critical infrastructure. Really, the number one item that pushes cybersecurity kind of forward is these regulations. It's unfortunately, and you can't blame them. They're working on keeping the power on, keeping the water flowing, keeping fuel going, doing all of these things. The sort of not putting it on the back burner, but cybersecurity is just really within the last 5-10 years has it really taken off and been something that's taken a lot more seriously as far as protection measures. And so it always baffles me thinking about that. I actually didn't even realize that until maybe 6 months ago, that it wasn't considered critical, especially after we had down in Florida that cyber attack. I forget what year. I want to say it was 2019. They had the cyber attack where levels were changed at a water treatment facility in Florida. And
that was 2020. That was the result of a COVID-related remote access solution.
I knew it was somewhere in that time frame, but especially after something like that where it makes the news, it's shown, hey, this can be done, this can be altered. It's really surprising that it hasn't been elevated.
Yeah, I'll say just from my quick searching, in the NIS2 directive, which is for Europe, water supply sector has been categorized as an essential sector, which is new. So at least on that side of the world, they will be focusing in on the water supply a little bit more with some stricter requirements.
That's good.
Nice.
That's
a little bit of
really
that over here wouldn't be the worst thing.
Well, the one thing that really gets me is, from a cyber perspective, it's been fairly light on the water side. But, from terms on not the influence side, but the effluent side, so sewer treatment facilities, there is a boatload of regulations on, the treatment facilities and what their allowances are as far as when they're going back out for the dewatering and things of that nature on the sewer side. But, on the effluent side, when you're doing water treatment facilities, you still have a lot of systems out there that have a lot of open settling basins and things of that nature. So, you have a lot of potential from that avenue of entry, from a physical security perspective than on the cybersecurity side. So it's kind of interesting that you have this full gambit coming in now for the water treatment side that's out there too. So it's fairly interesting seeing that coming down. And I think that it will continue to increase out there. But I think there's other components that are probably in the purview of the water treatment side as well as the cyber side that will probably start getting some additional look out there. So it's very interesting.
I think you're dead on the money though, Ken. I think within this next year, I really see it in power as well. I think between water, something's most likely going to happen in water just to show the immediate need to escalate it to as critical infrastructure and to actually add, cybersecurity policy and compliance around it. But I actually also see something really big happening with power. Simply because of the state of the world, I fully expect that a nation state somewhere is going to do some testing, if you will, that might really start to take power down in a city. I mean, I think it's been a big fear for a number of years that it's going to happen, but I think especially with kind of the state of the world, I fully expect, especially here in the United States and really North America as a whole, Canada and the US, I do foresee maybe some level of testing that takes down, the power in a Midwestern city or something like that, that might be a possible precursor of things to come.
Yeah. I mean, I hope we are wrong, but
yeah, absolutely.
The trend doesn't look great in that regard. And I mean, at least like I could definitely, because there was a story a year or so ago now too, as well, of, one or another nation state actors had in fact gotten quite deeply embedded into large sections of the U.S. power industry. And I guess, I don't like to think about that, but I mean, it is something that, we do have to confront, is that, I mean, if things continue to destabilize in other respects, right, politically or militarily, then that the ability to cause those sorts of disruptions is going to be a key strategic factor in any sort of conflict that emerges. And then, I think too, just me looking at water, I think about that as more like, low-hanging fruit, right? Like, I mean, the nation-state actors, they're going to be thinking about it in the strategic sense and looking at the strategic opportunities and implications of their actions. And then there's the other kind of threat actors who are just looking for the low-hanging fruit, right? Low effort, high impact, which, when you have an industry that provides something as important to life as drinking water, which tends to have, again, sort of those low margins, not a lot of budget, that's an attractive target, right? Because it's a pressure point. But let's try and move away from the doom and gloom a little bit. And let's, and again, Natalie, sort of, you were the one I think that Sally specifically approached to come on and offer some thoughts. So floor's yours, Natalie. Like, if you had to put your guess in for what's going to be a thing in 2025 in OT cyber, where do you see that going?
I guess for me, now that I've been talking to such a wide range of customers, I would say a lot of the trend I see the most is when they're being pushed to us towards because of governance reasons. So we were just talking about water, and I was doing some research as we were talking, and there's been a ton of new enforcement alerts about water. And as I read more, there's a ton of funding coming in from the EPA and other organizations that are helping customers or I don't know, operations start looking into these types of programs and enforcing them, because when they do kind of assessments, they'll find that right away, there's a bunch of gaps missing. So what I've seen in the last year or so is that a lot of people coming to a platform like Verve or any type of cybersecurity platform, usually they're being pushed to us because of these cybersecurity mandates or governance reasons. So where that leads to is, what are those governance reasons pushing them to do? And that's where I think the future is are they pushing them just to do reporting to show them this is just your current state and where you will be in the future, which in some cases that is a big part of it, is just identification. But then I think the biggest thing that customers are looking for is how do we do any type of patching in the OT environment, and not just talking OS device patching, but how do we do it safely for our OT and networking assets. But then the big thing that they're always concerned about is how does it impact the rest of the line. So if you patch one device, what happens to the rest of the devices around it? So I feel as far as from point A to point B, usually they'll come and ask about, how do we accomplish this governance or this regulatory thing that's being thrown at us, and we have a year to figure it out. And then when they have to actually start, doing any type of remediation actions, it's usually well, how do we even do that when you have a whole, operation that we have to, watch and make sure that whatever one action we do doesn't impact the rest of them. So I'd say, like, as far as conversation pieces, that's what I hear a ton of.
Can't
That's
help but
interesting.
agree. But go on, Tyler.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, I think it's as you get a lot of those GRC initiatives out there. So, like, one of the ones that really comes to mind on me, because, I was in the utility profession for the last 20 years before Verve, seemed like a lifetime ago, but NERC SIP was very prevalent. So it was kind of those initial adopters out there that were kind of forced into the area. And as it grew out of that, the requirements changed. They were trying to talk about, some of the bright line criteria and what some of those consisted of. And, what are the things that we're looking for? There was a lot of folks that were looking at it from the perspective of, well, what do I got to get in here to check the boxes to make sure that, we're not going to get fined? Because it came down as, NERC FERC, because, that was the regulatory committee that was apt to be able to, issue fines to folks. And that was kind of the forefront in our mind, because they were, in the process of issuing fines of up to like 10 grand a day or something of that magnitude. So they were looking, okay, well, we've got a year to implement this. What are the check boxes that we have to do? And then as that regulatory ecosystem continued to mature, then they started, kind of taking the chisel to it and refining it a lot more as far as the different standards that were coming into play and things of that nature. So, I think they approached it with like an almost a large paintbrush approach, and then they started getting it really granular down to the items that were really pertinent too, which a lot of times that's almost like what you can do. And then you start, trying to do the refinement, and then you start looking at the other adopters out there that are looking to maybe do more than just check the boxes, or maybe they were already ahead of the curve as far as doing their due diligence out there with some of the items that were characteristic within that regulatory that came down. So they helped, drive that. And I think there was a lot of other stakeholders that were involved in help refining a lot of that regulatory measure. So it goes a little bit both ways, from implementation to also influencing the regulatory row for where it's going as well. So it'll be interesting in that regard as you see other industries start to open up for where some of those concerns are, and as they come across, it's like the pipelines with the TSA. There's other stuff with transportation related things of that nature that I think would start creeping up as well. But it just depends on where your incidentals start coming into play and how it's out there and what's viewed as, a large target out there as well, right?
I think what's interesting about all of that is that in kind of the preparation for this discussion, Sally shared that SANS OTICS survey. And as you two were just talking about that, I was kind of just running down the list and thinking to myself, it's like, okay, well, I mean, there's some very lofty ambitions, I think, reflected in this survey, where it talks about like the beginnings of adoption of cloud-facing technologies, or the reticence to rush into adopting AI-based solutions, or the and then the one that kind of makes me really laugh is the fact that like 3/4 of the respondents to that survey reported that they had implemented MFA for remote access to their OT environments. And I think that's kind of, a very good snapshot of some of what you were just talking about, because you're going to have, especially in industries that are, subjected to regulatory pressures, regulation tends to move slower than technology. And budget, likewise, tends to move a lot slower than technology. And so it's kind of interesting that, you have some of the latest and greatest stuff is really not seeing a huge amount of uptake, 26% utilizing some kind of cloud integration, only 10% looking at integrating AI into their ICS and OT strategies. But almost everybody is rushing to get MFA put in place. I don't know. I just find that interesting, because it's like on the one hand, you do have these lofty ambitions of, moving more and more of these IT side technologies. We've talked about IT OT convergence before, but getting more and more of these IT side technologies, and especially the internet driven IT technologies, into the OT space. But the OT space is still like, okay, yeah, but can we just first make sure that whoever's actually coming in is properly vetted, and the outsider who shouldn't be coming in has a harder time of getting in? Can we start there?
I see what you mean. Like there's this thought process of, okay, we need to improve all of this, like right now AI is the big sexy. We want to get it integrated into absolutely everything, but the OT space, it's still focusing on what the IT space would consider like daily small fish, but it's something that OT is still trying to get all their ducks in a row and get everything all figured out in that world. Yeah, I think, kind of to Tyler's point before, I think we kind of have been, circling it a little bit, is I think 100% this comes down to a compliant requirement, Unfortunately, I think a lot, unless there is some sort of fine or some sort of, requirement, in order to do this, or to continue to stay in operation, or to continue to, be certified at this level, you've got to be in compliance with this governance and regulation. And if that is not the case, then there really isn't that fire to even do some of the basic stuff. And I think with AI, in some of the dashboards that we've developed for customers, a big number is, okay, well, where do we stand with this regulation or this compliance? Like for a power company, where do we stand for NERC SIP? Where do we stand for NIST? Where do we stand with NIS2? These sort of items, I think that's where I see AI really developing. I really see AI in the OT space developing almost for gap analysis, where it's, okay, we're here, the regulation is here, AI, pump out the 50 things that we need to get done this year, kind of thing. That's where I really could see AI developing and really being super useful. Maybe that's the key word, is that's where I see it being most useful right now. Especially considering that so many OT, so many manufacturers, especially not just on the critical infrastructure side, but manufacturers especially, I think they really there isn't a lot of those compliance for some of them. Like energy companies, yeah, they got NERC SIP, there is compliance for some level of things, but for a lot of manufacturers, there isn't a requirement, and yet they may not stand like a government target or a state actor target, but absolutely, hacktivists or hackers trying to make a quick buck, whatever the case may be, and they don't have a lot of that compliance that sort of protects them or forces them to be protected. So I think that's kind of where I see, like, one, I think that the governments, especially the Western governments, need to really focus on, okay, this company, fits this brand of manufacturing. So we need to ensure that there's some sort of requirement that they have got to fulfill. And then we can start, integrating the technology and the budget into things to get things up to par, and to kind of get everybody on the same defensive line.
Yeah. And even to add to that, I mean, just AI in general, obviously, it can have a lot of capabilities, but another gap that I hear customers ask about is like, how much manpower do we need to do cybersecurity? How many people do we need? Because typically it's, for a lot of these places, they'll maybe have one or two people if they're lucky, depending on the size of their enterprise, or maybe more. But they really don't have the workforce to be able to support a OT cybersecurity team. And so with that shift to AI, not just to fill those gaps, but also to fill the workforce gap, because even in those teams where they do have someone, doing cybersecurity for their operational side, typically those people, they're kind of, pushed into that role, and they're you almost have to like educate them when you're teaching them like a cybersecurity platform like Verve, or any other one, because most of those like cybersecurity OT people on their team, they either, they lack the OT specific certifications, or they're coming from the IT side and they don't know exactly, how, like, what the difference is, or, which OT devices are we going to be most concerned about? Is it going to be like, DCS or PLCs or robotics, or whereas they're, typically more focused on those, like, access points like routers and servers and computers. So I would say that would be another like lead off of that AI, is just like managing and just helping with the workforce issue that you've run into, not like in general in cybersecurity, but even more specifically within operations, which I see quite commonly, where they're like, how many people do we need? How often do we need to use a cybersecurity platform? And those are just some other like common questions I hear, is like, how much work is it? And usually it's not the answer they want to hear, depending on, how green or brown the site is. But yeah.
It kind of just comes off as like, essentially it's all aspirational. And, it's all well and good to have, the conversation about what AI can do. And we do need to have that conversation. We need to actually be able to like move people in the direction of recognizing that, here's a technology, and we're kind of focusing on AI here, but it's a good example. But, we have to be able to move people in the direction of recognizing that, yeah, this technology can be a real force multiplier for you, can actually help you do more with the handful of people that you do have on staff. But for a lot of people, that's going to just seem at best aspirational, because they're still trying to figure out, okay, but like right now, my water control system is sitting open on the internet. So how do I solve that first? And then can we worry about the AI stuff, right? They haven't even necessarily solved the access problem, let alone okay, now I have all this data about my system. What can it tell me? And, what can an AI agent of some kind help me craft a strategy for? They're still trying to figure out, I think that door over there is still open and I really need to like close it and lock it. Maybe I should do that first.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's something we've been working on a lot as a product, is our tech-enabled assessments, which the entire time that, I've had several customers now that we've kind of had the opportunity to do these tech-enabled assessments for, and in almost every single one of them, I find some way of improving our product, like our Verve product. And it's, for a multiple different, reasons or whatever, but there's been a lot of times now where we've had conversations with customers that have been like, this took you, how many hours? This took you 120, this took you 80, 40, whatever hours, periods of length. How quickly would AI have just been able to spit out a report if, there was a far more level of integration in it? And I think that's awesome, but it does, a lot of times, if I don't believe AI would see, it would see a lot of the information, obviously, but when it comes down to coming up with a plan, especially when you start talking about priorities and, hey, this area, like, yes, all of this infrastructure is important, but, these items right here are our crown jewels. We really need to get in and fix these first, like, immediately. And like you said, when it comes down to, an environment that isn't air-gapped, AI may be able to detect that, but if it's focusing on specific areas, I guess it really will depend on how it's created. This is kind of just hypothetical, but I'd be really curious to see just how that would impact things in terms of priorities. How an AI would visualize the priorities of saying, hey, these devices need patches immediately, and if at all, especially here in the early initiation of it into the OT space, if it would have a lot of like flips, like you said, Ken, like we need our environment to be air gapped first and foremost. I'm curious to see if AI would be like, nope, you need patches, you need to replace these PLCs, you need to do this, and it's like, well, actually, that's all good and all, but if we don't air gap this, like they can walk through the front door, and no matter what equipment we have or what kind of door we have, they're in, so. I'd be really curious to see how AI is going to kind of initiate the next year of security in OT.
Yeah, and another thing I would even consider from like an AI point of view, or just just in general, how we are identifying like any types of anomalies or events. I feel like in the next year, the detection and response approach might change because like traditionally you use like the like static rules almost to, look at, if this event happens, then flag this event, or, is this an expected or unexpected event sort of thing. And I feel like those like static rules are kind of becoming a bit obsolete. So I feel like these like advanced detection techniques that could be powered by AI or machine learning will kind of start to become the norm in it's already the norm in a lot of like IT security, but now transitioning that and seeing the application of it in OT cybersecurity, I feel like that's something we're going to start experiencing, seeing in a lot of these tools out there in the years coming. So that's another thought I had.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that's always kind of been the thing about, I kind of get a little bit academic on this. So one of the things I look at is AI is just another addition to a tool and tool bag, right? So there's got a lot of great potential out there, but there's still a lot of understanding as far as, what we feed the data into it as far as what we're asking it to do, right? It almost kind of gets me on the whole digital blacksmith kick. I would love to have been there for the first blacksmith that built that first pair of pliers and just had that genius moment right there, right? So I think it is, as with all technology, approach it with a lot of reserved optimism out there as far as what it can do for you, because it probably, and I'm under the impression that it can do a lot, but it just all comes down to, what are the things that you are feeding it for it to be able to distill, or what are you considering to be good and valid responses coming out of the system, to make sure that it's able to aggregate the most pertinent information and build some of those efficiencies out there for you. Because I think realistically, when it comes down to it, as far as any type of technology out there, you're just looking at for that technology to help build efficiencies in whatever process that you have out there, regardless of what the new technology is, right?
Yeah, for sure. Another thing I was kind of considering is we've heard zero trust a lot in the last year. It's been like the buzzword that I've had people ask, like, what is it? How do we do it? So I feel like it's another trend that's going to continue on into 2025, where people are going to be, less focused on like, doing security from like that location point of view to like doing the access to who it is and identity and like the context of the connection for zero trust. That's another, topic that I feel like comes up quite a bit, depending on, who's asking. And it's partially because of like the hype. I feel like 'cause it's a fun phrase, I feel like, and then you hear it from, government mandates, from vendors, talking about it, or, ransomware attacks, and then also like the idea of like the, hybrid workforce. And so I feel like that's one trend that I feel like will not go away just because people hear about it and then they want to act on it. So that's another like security paradigm that I would think would continue to come up even in the next year.
Yeah, you talk about zero trust. That's another one that just gets really weird for me too, because it's almost like the zero trust was more of a marketing thing around a lot of things that we already had existing out there. We just kind of packaged them all up and said, okay, well, this is all your componentry of zero trust now. So like all the network access control we've had for quite a while now, and then trying to talk about some of these intent-based networking and things of that nature. And I think it was one of those things where they came up with a lot of this different items out there, but they just didn't really have a good hook out there for what the concept that they were trying to come up with. And then somebody came up with zero trust networking out there, and it really stayed. And it just comes from the perspective of, hey, we're going to lock this down to where it's not going to communicate with anything, and we are going to prescriptively open up these items one by one out here, based on what are the intents and what are kind of the day-to-day things out there for this, whether that be through network access control, host-based firewall rules, or some type of a cloud controller or something of that nature that rolls in with it. So it really turns into an academic experience for me too, because I'm just looking at it, it's like, man, we've had these things around for a while, but we haven't had this terminology until just recently. So it's almost kind of funny in a little bit of a way, but it seems like it's taken off and it's really shown a lot of traction for these existing tool sets out there to really drive that philosophy around how we should be doing networking components out there too. So, given as it may.
Yeah. Whoever came up with the term for that, vendor marketing, they did a great job, because I feel like everyone's tossing that word around, even if they might not understand the full scope of it, or the fact that it's just rebranding something that was already there.
Exactly, right? It's just, hey, it works, right? So it's a great deal. And, I think, just kind of getting into like the AI and the zero trust and all that. So it's just trying to see what is going to be the new hot within the area out there. I think one of the things that Sally brought over was, increasing the convergence of IT and OT. So from me, the things that I'm seeing out there is there's more demand for the data as is coming across from the OT platform. So like there was a big advent of just-in-time manufacturing out there. So I know, Zach, you had brought up the manufacturing side of it out there. So they're trying to build some of these efficiencies to where we're not doing so much in the way of multi-batch processing out there in a way of manufacturing, where we're constantly retooling based on what is the just-in-time need out there for the demands that's being out there. Well, how do I know what my manufacturing is doing? I have to have indications from my demand, and then also know what my manufacturing side is doing. So I get those indications of where I need to ramp up at, and then like how fast is it going to. So I see a lot of that out there. That's probably more along the lines of some of the adoption of the cloud stuff out there too, is you're trying to integrate all those components and have some type of a powered business intelligence system that really pulls all this stuff in together to be able to get this better visibility. So that's where I've seen a large part some of the manufacturing sides going, is more consistent access to their data that they have existing out there, whether that's in trending or in some type of a real time ledger out there to see how things are going within the space. So kind of a wild spear.
You're talking a lot of what is it, threat intelligence and stuff like that?
So like on the cyber side, for sure, because, the curation of all that stuff, the different feeds and things of that nature, when you're talking from a cyber perspective, will be pretty enormous too. And all the different data lakes you have to pull that information from, right? So, I think the IT side has had that for a while, where they'll pull in like different threat actors, see how it's, traversing the worldwide globe and how it's going. So, trying to push those bad actors a lot further out before they actually come in, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Another thing, another theme that I've also seen is when like a cybersecurity platform comes into a customer, where essentially like a third party coming in. And so usually the question I get is like with like their third party risk engagement, whatever their internal policies and procedures are. So like customers are trying to like reduce the number of third parties that they already have in their organization, and then how do they know that they're trying to reduce them to reduce that risk, but then the ones that they actually have, they're like trying to check and see if those third parties actually have like a cybersecurity, platform that they're using to manage themselves, or what they're doing to essentially stay secure. So not just cybersecurity platforms, but any other third parties that they're using. And that's another thing that I see a lot, is the trend towards, either reducing the number of third parties if it's possible, or finding a way to make sure that those like third parties that they have like engaged in their operations, how do they check to make sure that what they have there isn't going to compromise or disrupt operations in another way, because sometimes it even comes down to like who's making the decision on this third party. Is it the OT side, or is it a business decision that was made without any like context to like a cybersecurity assessment for that third party tool? that's another thing I feel like I hear about, where people are, because we're like, they start asking like, what are our cybersecurity platforms like assessments, and then they start wondering about the ones that they already have existing in their environment.
That's interesting. I'm almost wondering if you could categorize that as the supply chain management, right? Because if I got a vendor out there with remote access, I want to see what their practices are and things of that nature, right? I'm trying to think. I think there is some stuff around that. We're trying to make sure of around your vendors, what their practices are, making sure that they're doing their due diligence, also impact on your systems too, consistent change management practices, things of that nature. I can see that still continue to come up. Yeah, S-bombs, S-bombs. You had to bring up S-bombs, right?
You know it.
Oh, that's been one that's been, still standing up around there. And I would like to think like a couple of years ago, it was kind of in its infancy out there. But then as it started coming out, people started talking about the S-bombs and trying to make sure like even that software supply chain out there is being made consistent. If you're repackaging a lot of different open source products within your ecosystem and making sure that none of those are being left behind as far as any updates and things of that nature. It's just kind of going back to the basics of what I said earlier. So it's so think about it in this way. It's your application supply chain out there, right? So like you have a product out there, and I'm going to pull a couple of things out of thin air here. So maybe it relied on Ruby on Rails. I know that's a oldie but goodie out there that's still sometimes used out there. I might be dating myself a little bit as well. So, it was a Ruby on Rails application. It was also bundled with like Apache most of the times, as well as maybe some other embedded database vector as well. So that's one of the other things that's kind of complicates out there a lot of the software components, because you have a lot of other distinct compositions of typically open source applications that is used within your own application space for your own product, right? So then maybe from the end user perspective, all the installers are just chained together and you're really not made aware of the usage of the other things on the underlying, except maybe seeing, oh, well, this spawned an Apache instance out here for this particular application. And I'm running this application that I'm using specifically for my intended purpose out here. But also within that supply chain of that software package, you have Apache, Ruby on Rails, maybe a MongoDB or a MySQL database and things of that nature. I'm sure you guys are already aware, there's other software vulnerabilities cooked into those components. And then it comes into question, well, is my software vendor being mindful of all those other underlying software components to make sure that those are updated and I don't have any phantom vulnerabilities out here outstanding that is part of some other underlying component of this package that I'm using out here. So that's kind of the roughish gambit around S-bombs that's out there. It's fairly interesting because as you start peeling back the onion on them, you start realizing that there is a lot of usage out there on that, and trying to keep up on it is one of the main aspects of the company that Ron went out to. Is they'll actually do a decomposition of like an installer, and they'll do like a hash check of some of the componentry files in there to give you a better understanding of what is some of the key components in there as far as the other embedded components of it. So it's an interesting one. If you get time, go out there and read up about the SBOMs out there. It's actually a fairly interesting perspective, especially on the software supply chain side.
Yeah, seems like I have a lot to learn on that topic, but thank you.
Yeah, no
I mean,
worries.
even I've seen cases where, clients of ours have put questions to me in conversations I've had with them where they're like, okay, so, the Verve software is detecting that, we have this, that, or the other thing in play, or maybe not even our software, but, because they're also working with Verve. And then they've had like some outside auditor come in, and the outside auditor's been just like, oh, hey, by the way, like we have this piece of software and this piece of software and this piece of software. And these are all like outdated and they have vulnerabilities and stuff like that. What do we do about that? And, you kind of look at it a little closer and you're like, okay, well, that whole thing is like kind of bundled inside a single application that's running, say inside a container or inside, a VM, and like it's kind of all bottled up in this, part of an overall proprietary solution. And it's like, okay, well, what's your option? Like, do you have a path to upgrade the individual components? If not, then, okay, what's the path to upgrade the whole darn thing? Which could get you back to, another thing that we've talked about earlier in earlier episodes is, well, is it the difference between like, well, I'm just doing like a minor software upgrade or a whole capital project rip and replace to get rid of these vulnerable components that happened to be bundled with this solution that I put in place to do the job that I need to do. And I mean, in theory, an SBOM is supposed to point you in the direction of being able to identify those things before the auditors or the regulators come in and find them. But at the same time, it isn't always easy to just be like, okay, well, I know that they're there. What do I do about it? Because, sometimes there isn't a really clear-cut path to actually remediating the issue. Whether that's going to have an impact down the road, I'm not sure, right? Is it going to have an impact on the market space and on vendors who want to continue to compete, especially in these segments of the industry that are subject to significant regulation? Don't know. Feel like it might. Not 100% sure, though.
Another thing that I was debating with someone about earlier today with a customer was the timing of monitoring. So when like the pros and cons of that, like real-time network monitoring or just, endpoint monitoring versus like the scheduled frequency of monitoring, where either you have it running, all the time monitoring and, having to deal with like increased network load versus but then having more immediate, like feedback when something does occur in case it, and then as opposed to your like the frequency of when you're setting up like monitoring to happen, every hour or once a day or once a week, or maybe if you want to go the other direction, like every, 30 minutes, 15 minutes. And so it was a conversation piece where we were debating about, do we, is it better to have something with lower frequency but scheduled versus the continuous monitoring of OT systems to be able to detect threats as they occur. So I was going to see what your guys' thoughts are on that.
Oh gosh, that's like the age-old controls engineer thing out there. When you're talking about SCADA systems and all that, it's like
I mean, anything's possible with enough processing horsepower.
Yeah, if you've got the bandwidth, who cares? But you can almost kind of go back to the old controls engineers, like, hey, I've got all this stuff that's coming over this 128K line, and I don't want to saturate it, type of thing, right? So I don't know. It's kind of getting to know your environment and, what are some of the possibilities out there, like there's a lot of times where you set up like networking components for like logging components, like, and I think this kind of comes down to how do you stagger how you want your visibility out there. So like there's typical logging, which is, we're monitoring the environment for any type of exceptions or things of that nature, where we set up like a syslog server or something like that from a networking component. Or maybe that's not really enough. Maybe we want to monitor all the device interactivity where we're getting a different tool to do like a span port on all the networking to be able to do very in-depth analysis as far as the network traffic that's going on out there. So I mean, it's a very different level definition based on what are your end results that you're wanting to do. That I think that's where I'm gravitating towards. It kind of well define your problem statement on what you're wanting to accomplish, right? Does that kind of fall into the line what you're thinking about there?
Yeah, that's fair. Because I think in this case, I don't know what their bandwidth was or any of their setup, but in the case of just the debate, it was more of a, I guess, educational piece of which would be better for your environment, something that's constantly going to be checking in, but then, you might increase network load because you're not, monitoring exactly how much that action is occurring, or just having the very, set black and white frequency of, we're going to check every 15 minutes or every 1 hour. And then between those times, nothing's happening. So you have that like full control over your environment.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Let me dial this back around because I was kind of being more broad about it. So like maybe like in the context of like our tooling, like the Verve tooling, right? Whereas, we set up the different schedules to go out there to query those endpoints, right? So like, is there any changes in the environment, right? So like in our tooling, we'll set that up to maybe like once a day, go out there, check the device and see if there's any changes or anything like that. And I think that's kind of the intrinsic thing of the asset inventory portion of it, right? So one of the key characteristics that we look for is the configuration and if there's any like changes in the configuration, right? So you could probably stand to make the arguments like, well, maybe I want to check it once an hour, see if some nefarious actors come out there and try to change the configuration on these devices. Well, I could probably also stand to reason that you should probably in that context have something set up that any type of detection into the system be sent out in the form of a syslog, right? Where you're capturing some type of chained event that's happening within the ecosystem through some type of other combined mechanism to be able to see, okay, well, first of all, I sensed somebody was in there through the syslog mechanism. They did make a change. I did see that come over to syslog as well. And then as also a part of my asset inventory, it came around the next day and said, yes, indeed, there is a change. And here's the comparison between the two from what it was to what it is now type of situation. So, yeah, I mean, you could go out there and you could hit it once an hour and see if there's any type of change affected in there. But are you really being effective to your environment too, right? So I think it's just trying to build some context about, what are some of the end goals and building some of the detections around that based on what your current ecosystem setup is, and maybe they don't have a current logging mechanism set up where they're watching some of those inbound logs, or somebody is watching that context, or it's not being fed into an ecosystem that'll send an alert based on that access that's outside of hours or something of that nature. So it's almost twofold. Is you almost have to build the case around the mechanism that you're trying to solve for, and then make sure that you're not being too aggressive with it, because you can also get to a point of where you're we had a saying for it in the SCADA department where you're just getting overwhelmed with all the alarms that are going in, and then you'll just start muting them out there.
Alert fatigue, yeah.
Yeah, I hear that a ton actually.
Right? You're kind of hearing all the SCADA alarms going off in the background and everything there too, and it may be just kind of nuisance alarms, right? So there's a lot of performance tuning, or trying to make sure that the alarms that you are getting are pertinent within the ecosystem that are actionable as well too. So that takes some time and some thought into the process, as well as making sure you're talking to the people that are well in tune to what are some of the very periodic things that is happening within the ecosystem too, right? So just building around
I think
that.
Alarm fatigue is the phrase I've heard of quite a bit, where people just get that, alarm fatigue. They see it so much that they just start ignoring it.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for that.
Yeah. So another thought I had while we were talking, which is now we're kind of taking a whole left turn, is like legacy devices. They're around, they're always going to be around, and customers don't always have that capability, obviously, to update them to the newest and greatest versions of whatever there is. So what trends would you guys say might come up in the next year for protecting legacy devices? Because what I've heard, at least in the past year or years, is using, like, for example, like a SIP proxy, where you like place it in front of that legacy device to handle that communications on their behalf, and then doing that as a bare minimum to start protecting these legacy devices. Have you guys seen any other trends or things that might be coming up that you might think are gonna show up in 2025?
I haven't. And I mean, it's not like legacy devices are not, okay, this is actually a really lame joke. Legacy devices are not new, but and the challenge of dealing with them is also not new. But the thought that I have is, I can remember having discussions like many, many years ago, 10, 15 years ago, about like, well, what are some options for like, and this was more in the context of like securing communications out to those devices, right? Like, can you put bump in the wire encryption? Well, sometimes you can. Could you put like some sort of like a Tofino firewall in front of them, or some other kind of SIP device in front of them? It's a possibility. But a lot of these older legacy devices are very, very latency sensitive. And that kind of adds an additional challenge, because all these things that you can put inline risk introducing a kind of latency. And if you have more than that limited tolerance threshold of latency in the communications now all of a sudden, then the data coming back to your control system stops being reliable, which can get you into all kinds of different problems, depending on the regulatory environment, depending on the operational environment. So, which is not to say that, you shouldn't look into solutions like that. Absolutely. Those are solutions to be looked into. But that, I think, has been like the most consistent bit of pushback I've heard in that regard, is that those older devices are really, really latency sensitive, or can be. And anything that risks introducing too much latency into the communication with them, it's not going to fly to begin with. Of course, if the alternative is to rip it out and do a capital project to replace it, then, maybe the argument can be made. But it is a difficult conversation to have.
Oh, yeah. So here's another conversation that I can bring up. So the CrowdStrike breach that happened, which was super high profile. I think one of the articles I was reading about it was that for like historically, a lot of customers would try and consolidate their like cybersecurity tools using like a single vendor to like essentially have all of it, consolidated into one, so they don't have to, manage a bunch of different tool sets. But this article I was reading about a couple of days ago was saying that now people are considering like diversifying their like cybersecurity platforms to kind of like stack them in case something like a CrowdStrike breach happens again. Are you guys seeing that in the OT space as well, where people are starting to layer different types of tool sets together?
I definitely am, to a degree. Maybe not necessarily like redundancy in the same exact area, but like I've seen some clients that'll have like, they'll have one SIM with a totally different vendor for like asset management, and then a totally different vendor for vulnerability management. So I've seen things where they've kind of buckshotting it a little bit, for lack of a better term, where they have centralized vendors for certain purposes, but then those vendors might have some carryover into other areas. So I've definitely seen some level of it, not a lot. But definitely I've seen it a few times.
So from my perspective, I mean, you're always going to have a little bit of crossover with some traditional tooling out there. Backups is one of them that's, fairly universal. The one thing that we're seeing is, a lot of our customers out there, they'll be more aggressive on, say, like domain joined machines out there that are part of the IT proper of the organization, and not necessarily the OT proper. We actually had so I had a customer that was having an issue with they went away with one product and they brought in a different product, and their SIMS computers, this is their continuous emission monitoring computers that monitor all the effluent gases for their generation facility, were domain joined. So they were all they were all in due time with all the group policy updates, all of the different policies for the different IT tooling and things of that nature. And they found out this tool that they went to was causing some latency in the hard drive writes of this. I won't call it like a legacy application, but it was an older application that they were utilizing within their SIMS environment to be able to write binary files, basically data files, out to the local file system. And what they were finding is that they were getting outrun on the data read-write cycles as it was filtering through this tooling, and it was creating errors in their data log for the SIMS data, which is I don't think I should have to say it with our audience here, but it's very bad. And
very bad.
If you have SIMS data that is being interrupted on writes and it's not giving you correct numbers or anything like that, that's one of the very higher order items that is a finable offense when it comes to emissions monitoring if you don't have correct and good data. So they were having to go back and re-download from their hardware pullers to their software devices, and they were chasing this for at least a couple of months out there. So I think that's kind of one of the key characteristics that we're also seeing across the OT side is they're trying to be very cautious about the extra applications that they're throwing on their OS dependent components that are out there, because it can cause interruptions into the rest of the operation, and it could be the rest of the operation that is more scrutiny around it for the data that they're collecting out there. So that's why they tend to stay away from the more aggressive things out there, like the new hot for like the XDR, what's the three? The MDR, XDR, and something DR
EDR
out there. EDR, yes, thank you. They're trying to stay away from those types of devices because the impact that it has on those is pretty substantial. And when you get the controls engineers guys, there's the ones that are maintaining all this equipment. They may not be up to speed with full systems analysis and networking background like some of the rest of us are. So they tend to stick to what they have and know, and put the least amount of stuff on these OS systems as a bare minimum so it doesn't have any impact to operations out there. So I could see that continuing to be the trend out there, just because of there's no warm fuzzy yet out there for any of the other componentry out there that is OT safe, right? And we like to talk that up out there quite a bit because, we've curated a lot of componentry out there that we've deemed OT safe out there, because it just provides that very, very low margin of impact to the running OS assets out there, as well as the way that we build our drivers around things is to provide a very, very unobtrusive means of method of being able to inventory devices, as well as provide you the most information around your devices out there too. So that's kind of the key characteristics that I'm seeing for those style of IT packages versus what would be like OT packages. Is that kind of what
one thing that's interesting in the SANS data about what you said there, not like specifically about our software, because I mean, we know that, yeah, we're trying to build something that's really low impact, but still delivers a high amount of information about the environment that you're running it in. But, you talked about, and this has come up a few times actually in the conversation, is just, because at the end of the day, it kind of is the people on the ground at the plant floor that have to run this thing, right? We haven't mentioned Bob the electrician in this episode, but the unofficial podcast mascot, he is, or maybe she is, but there's going to be someone at the plant floor who this ultimately all falls on. And they may not even want to be in that role, or it wouldn't have been their first choice to be in that role. And they may not necessarily have the expertise to execute on all of the finer points of what that role entails, which is another data point that came out in like that SANS survey that Sally linked. Over half of respondents lacked IT or ICS OT specific certifications, reflecting a skills gap in the industry. And that is just so often how it is. You do meet a lot of immensely qualified people out there in the OT space overseeing the cybersecurity programs at their facilities, but you meet just as many who would much rather be changing out the light bulbs. And in addition to not having, a deleterious impact on their data integrity or the performance of their operational environment, the solutions need to be, for lack of a better term, accessible to them. It is all well and good to talk about zero trust architecture and AI and even, more mundane things, if you can call them that, like network segmentation and access controls. But a lot of the times, all of that, whatever you're bringing to the attention of the people who are on the other end of these programs and these efforts, it has to be accessible to them. It has to be something that they can at least start to understand, if not actually get their hands a little bit dirty with. And if it's going to fly over their heads, then even if it does somehow get implemented, it's probably not going to get implemented in a way that is a net benefit to the overall security posture of their facility and the company.
Yeah, it's that 2 a.m. call. Like, who do they call to, like, hey, I've got a OS device out here that's not functioning for me, where does that come into, right? And that's kind of one of the reasons why we've got an OTSM group, is because, we know some of the challenges around all the OT level componentries out there. And that's why we, try to be very low key on the applications that we send out there where it doesn't have that impact out there. So a lot of times they're looking at it from perspective of, and a lot of these guys are pretty knowledgeable where they've seen those impacts where, maybe device 2 is acting up on me. And instead of trying to do like some large triage on it, I just remove that particular application from device 2 and put it on 3. And now it's pulling double duty for unit 2 and unit 3 type of situation. So there are some redundancies out there that come into play, but then it, same guy, electrician Bob, or, somebody out there trying to do that 2 o'clock in the morning triage to get the plant back up and running, or at least functional until they can go back in there during like normal business hours to do the rest of the triage on it. So it's interesting.
Yeah, it is. Well, I, for one, need to wrap it up. So I think what I'm going to do is I'll just go around, and Natalie, we'll start with you, but give us like a final thought looking ahead to 2025. A trend or a thing that you think's on the horizon, but just like a final parting thought as we close out this year and head into the new one.
Yeah, I guess the last thought I'll have is that with hybrid workforces, and even though we have people working, in operational, environments where they're on the floor, a lot of people are bringing in, devices from home, either, their phones or laptops if they're personal, or, by work, and then they're connecting it to their personal devices. So I'm thinking one of the trends that started, during the pandemic and is not going to go away and it's going to keep coming back is, the risks involved in, employees having their own like technological devices and bringing them into operational environments, and then what risks those might bring in as well. So that's my final closing thought.
Oh man, so many memories. Zach, what about you?
Kind of going full circle. I'm gonna go right back to one of our first discussion points. I'm really excited to see what sort of compliance comes within the next year. I would hate to see that compliance come from some sort of emergency or something of that nature, but ultimately, whatever sort of drives that compliance to better secure a lot of our customers and better secure a lot of the manufacturers and critical infrastructure organizations out there that desperately need that boost.
Absolutely. And how about yourself, Tyler?
Wow, where to start here? Yeah. So I would say, we're going to continue to see new faces out there when it comes to the round of, cybersecurity and the impacts that it has for them. A lot of new faces, a lot of questions that will probably be coming around all that. And then a lot of people reaching out, wanting to know, what is some of this new stuff and how does it impact us? So I think that's going to continue to be on the rise. I think AI will continue to help us out in some places that we didn't realize that we needed some help in. And then I think there's still continues to be a drive for additional data needs out there too. So as we, consume more data day to day, we're going to have more and unique ways to try to make sure that we're securing that data, or we're trying to be able to convey it in a fashion where nobody can get down into the nice GUI center that is the OT environments that we usually help protect out there.
Brilliant. Well, that is it for this year. You have been listening to OT After Hours, a podcast about industrial cybersecurity, why it matters, and all of the challenges that it presents. Please share our episodes with your friends, your family, your colleagues, and anyone else you think would be interested in industrial cybersecurity as a topic. And please do consider leaving us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, Podchaser, or wherever you get your podcasts. This podcast has been produced by myself, Kenneth Kully. Our opening and closing music is by the ever-so-talented Octo Sound. Look them up if you need some music for a podcast or a video. Thank you, Natalie. Thank you, Tyler. Thank you, Zach. And thank you out there for listening. We will talk to you next year.